Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are and wherever you're attending this forum. I hope the day's proceedings have been going well for you so far. I want to begin by acknowledging that Simon Fraser University, where I am, is located on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam First Nations. As a migrant settler, I'm grateful for the opportunities I am afforded living on these lands. My name is Shaheen Nanji, and I'm the Executive Director of SFU International. For those of you who don't know, SFU, we're one of a few research universities in the province of British Columbia in Canada, and our vision is to be Canada's engaged university. We prioritize sustainability, equity, and impact as responsibilities for our university. I'd like to thank York University for inviting me to moderate this session on sustainable and inclusive internationalization, which calls on us to think about the impacts of COVID-19, the innovation potential, and the moral responsibilities we hold as international offices of universities. How do we commit to these responsibilities and see them through? And how can we share experiences on sustainable and inclusive global engagement? This session is going to focus on sustainable and inclusive learning. Specifically, we're asking two questions. The first is, how can universities ensure that all students, regardless of their socioeconomic or cultural background, are empowered and supported to participate in international education and global learning opportunities? And the second is acknowledging that racism and other forms of discrimination present crucial sustainability challenges. What are universities doing to create better systems and to provide equitable opportunities? Statistics show that finances, curricular relevance, colonial or Western-centric paradigms, and other factors affect participation in mobility programs, but we've yet to fully understand students' views and aspirations, particularly post-pandemic. And what do we mean by the words global learning, sustainability, and inclusive education? On the second question around creating better and more equitable systems, I've personally been thinking a lot about this of late. How do we reconcile that systems are made up of people, and how do we as public institutions develop and nurture our members at the personal level to become champions for transforming our systems at SFU? At SFU, we're in the final stages of developing an adapted SDG framework for global engagement. And as we turn our attention to the implementation of the framework, I'm increasingly aware that institutions and systems don't hold all the accountability. The people that make up the institutions are the ones who will, in fact, be the ones to change or to create equity and sustainability. But I should stop going on. I should hand the mic over to our keynote speaker today, who's going to interrogate the meaning of global learning, sustainability, and inclusive education. She'll also share with us some examples of what her university is doing to address the needs and perceptions of global learning and systems that create equity and inclusion. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Bhavani Rao, who is the Dean of the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences at Amrita University. She's the director of two research centers, the Amrita Multimodal Applications and Human-Computer Interaction Center and the Center for Women's Empowerment and Gender Equality. She's been designated as India's UNESCO Chair in Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment, and her work focuses on empowering underserved communities, especially women in rural areas, through capacity building and vocational skills development using the latest technologies. Since 2009, she's led many projects funded by international, national, and foreign organizations, including UN agencies and the Government of India. Dr. Rao, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Shaheen. It's a real pleasure to be presenting my ideas at this forum, and I do hope that it'll provide some food for thought and there'll be something that interesting that comes out of it. So thank you to the organizers of the conference for having me here. And again, greetings to everybody. as appropriate to your time zones. It's past midnight over here, so if there's an occasional yawn, you would understand why it is. So Dr. Shaheen provided a very beautiful setting for me to present my ideas, and they reflect a lot of little points that she made while she was introducing the topic. So let me get a little bit into unraveling the way I see the words sustainable, the way I see the words inclusive, global learning. Start with learning. Learning is an outcome of education, so we can start at education. At Amrita, our chancellor envisions two kinds of education. One is education for a living, and the second is education for life. And when we talk about education for living, we're talking about what we're most familiar with, an education that is based, that gives us some kind of a vocation, an education that will provide us a comfortable life, meeting not just our basic needs, but also our wants and maybe a little bit more. But very few universities actually really delve into education for life. And when I say education for life, I'm talking about an education that equips you with the skills to get through life with contentment, happiness, harmony, compassion, and of course, with inclusivity and sustainability. And that's what education should be. It should be holistic and comprise both these aspects. Um, our chancellor also says there are two kinds of poverty. One is a poverty of lack of food, clothing, and shelter, your basic needs. And the other is a poverty that comes from the lack of love and compassion. And she says that when you address the second kind of poverty first, you automatically address the first kind of poverty. For when you have compassion and love in your heart, you automatically work towards alleviating the suffering that comes from the first kind of poverty, which is a lack of your food, clothing, and shelter, and your basic needs. So I'm going to use these two very powerful statements because there's so many layers of meaning and takeaways from these two statements. It'll help us also understand better how that applies to education, to inclusivity, and eventually to sustainability. So at Amrita, we have a very interesting program. Our education, our technical education, our mainstream education is combined with life skills. And one of a very unique program that is embedded in every department and every program in the university is a program called Live in Labs. So what happens in Live in Labs is all department, all faculty, and all students at Amrita are required to spend at least about a month in about the more than 150 plus rural communities that the university works in. And these are very remote communities. The students are prepared beforehand before they go to the field. They go there uh, with an attitude of humility and respect. They learn and to give. They go there to learn, but also to give to the best of their abilities. And the students work with the rural communities. They gain a finer understanding of what the challenges are in the rural communities, but also they gain an understanding of what the resilience, the strength, and the knowledge that is there in these communities, and work with the communities together to build and implement solutions. Their exposure to a simpler way of living, closest to nature, livelihoods based living where there is a very strong dependency on natural resources, the inner resilience of these communities basically change the students' outlook on life. It awakens that compassion and respect in the students, and it deals with the second kind of poverty. And automatically, this starts that whole process of transformation where they start working towards the benefit of those who are afflicted by the first kind of poverty. So it's a perfect example of how addressing the second kind of poverty deals with the first kind of poverty. Um, I'll move from the education part a little bit into inclusivity over here. Um, Going off of what Shaheen said a little earlier, to be very honest and very truthfully, there is no room for any kind of condescension in inclusivity. Um, when you reach out to another, you meet them where they are at. And as you give, you also gain and you also learn. And therefore, you maintain a flow of knowledge that is born from respect. And inclusivity is not something that is purely institutional. It is very much personal. It must be personal. We are talking about an age where we cannot even live with another person in our lives. How then are we talking about inclusivity in much larger and much grander scales? There is some shift that must happen from the attitude of the world being about me to a world being about us. So there's some fundamental shift that has to happen within us when we're talking about inclusivity. It's not just an institutional thing. That change is fundamental within our system. And education system should be geared to make sure that this shift happens, both in faculty and in the students. It can't happen only in one group. And this program allows for that shift to happen. When you go and you live with the people, and the people from the rural communities tend to be more collectivistic, so their acceptance of you often creates that shift towards a more inclusive way of being from within you. And that shift basically makes you, it doesn't think of an inclusivity where you bring somebody to your level, but it's you meet the person where they are at, and it's not about giving, it's about receiving, giving, receiving, and growing along with the other. Allow me to present this another angle on the same idea. Maybe a little bit radical in terms of there may be some problems in accepting the idea, but bringing the point of inclusivity again back to respect. It's important to respect other cultures, and sometimes you sacrifice some things so that you allow for inclusivity. The way I would say it is, suppose you're talking about India. So India traditionally, especially at the undergraduate level, the parents pay for the education. The student doesn't necessarily pay for their own education. So the parents have rules and regulations about where they will invest their money for the future of their child. So oftentimes when it comes to girl students, they would rather send their daughters to a place that is safe, and oftentimes safe in an Indian context will probably mean stricter boarding regulations, stricter hostel regulations. So in some sense, the cost of it is that your freedom is curtailed. And this could be something that is very offensive in a Western culture. But in an Indian culture, till the time we get to the point where a woman can walk around in the middle of the night and there's absolutely no problem, it is better for us to make sure that there are institutions that will give a safer, in whatever understanding of safer means in the cultural context, to the women, so that it does not deny them the kind of education. Otherwise, the parents will just be too afraid to send their daughter to a place which offers good education. So there are certain kinds of things that you may have to sacrifice to also to have some kind of inclusivity, and that should be based on respect for that particular individual culture. Like, for example, if there is an Islamic woman who comes to the class wearing a hijab, um, wouldn't it be better that she came to school with a hijab than the fact that she was not allowed to go to a class because there was a regulation against wearing hijab? So it is better to be accommodating of cultural nuances, and if you really want to have inclusivity in your culture and in your space, then you may have to make a few compromises so that you can actually include people. And going back to the perspective of inclusion, which is from a more traditional sense. For example, I head the Center for Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment. A lot of what we do is providing skills and access to education and livelihood for women in rural areas. So, and we set up centers in very, very remote parts of India with computers, with all the bells and whistles, really nice training centers. We don't take the women from the village to a nice center. We put centers right where they are, so that and we structure our classes and our classrooms, everything that fits their life and their needs, including the curriculum is something that is co-designed with them. So We identify what skills they want to learn, what are their challenges, what are the capacities that they need to build, and work with them in creating a curriculum that is most appropriate with them. As we speak, we have about, I think, 55 active centers with over 3,000 women that are being trained on as of today in 21 states in the country. And not just the women, we make sure that the men and the children, the family, is also a part of the conversation. And this becomes very key to sustainability. If you want the woman to stay in the class and go through her training, it's very important to have the buy-in of her husband also. That's how rural communities work. And so we make sure that the men are also engaged in the conversation. And this is when inclusivity actually becomes sustainable. An educated woman would automatically, or a woman who has the skills to either towards gainful employment or to change the way her society is structured, oftentimes then will influence the spheres of her work, her family, and therefore her future. And the way we do it, she also knows that she has much to offer. So her path is not paved by a sense of poverty, but by a sense of confidence that she too has something to offer. The business comes because you approach them with respect and with the attitude that you are going to learn from them just as much as they are going to learn from you. And the same kind of thing also happens to our students who go to the villages. They come back very often far more resource efficient, much more aware and conscious, far less wasteful. Their experiences in the village transform them as a person. They give back to society, making it possible. So this transformation that happens within them stays with them not just the time when they're in the college with us, but when they graduate. It's not just about raising their selves higher and higher, but to also curb that and give back, therefore bridging that inequality. So it's not just this way, but it kind of comes down this way, and that's how we reduce that inequality. And this comes, and one of the fundamental values that makes this happen is the sense of respect that you and compassion that you build when you go to the villages and you work with rural communities. Touching back upon traveling being a part of experience of learning, global learning, COVID impacting that kind of movement, the questions are whether is it sustainable for people to actually travel and learn. At Amrita, we have a very different sense of traveling. We may not go to Harvards and Yales to learn, but we go to the villages. And these are the universities of life. And if you ask me if this is sustainable, I think so. But the question is, can I convince you that this is sustainable?
Thank you so much for these really interesting thoughts. And I'm sorry that the time just flew by. We only have about a minute left. So, it would have been great to have a longer time because I have questions for you. But I just, in the time that we have left, I just want to thank you for sharing with us the work that you and your university are doing around creating these experiential opportunities for students, staff, and faculty to learn collective responsibility and the shared nature of our challenges, and to approach these, to move beyond a sense of humility in understanding how we do this work, and to have a sense of shared reality instead. And I'm really interested also about your views on inclusion and how we go beyond thinking about concessions that we might make to create inclusions as a sacrifice, but develop a better sense again of a shared reality, and that there's something in it for all of us. So I'd love to dig into more, to hear more about the programs that your university offered, but I just want to say thank you so much for this time, Dr. Rao. Thank you so much.
Thank you.